Good morning. Yesterday we explained how the Rambam defines the laws of Pesach as Hilchot Hametz Umatzah. And therefore it's important we understand, to begin with, what the definition of Hametz is from a biblical and rabbinic perspective. Torah tells us very clearly, Shivat Yamim, for 7 days, Hametz should not be eaten. And it also says, Kol Mahmetzet lo tochelu, do not eat any leavening agent. Which means the prohibition from the Torah against eating Hametz is either eating something which has fermented on its own, or something which has been fermented through an external agent, or even something which is used to ferment other things. That is all considered Hametz, and that's forbidden from the Torah. And the severe prohibition which comes with this is the prohibition of karet. Most other food prohibitions in the Torah are a negative prohibition, which carries the consequence of malkut, of lashes, whereas when it comes to Hametz on Pesach, it comes with the consequence of karet, which means spiritual death, essentially. From the Torah, the prohibition lasts for the 7 days of Pesach, and when a person eats Hametz any time during the 7 days of Pesach, that carries with it the consequence of karet. However, from midday before Pesach, from Hatzot before Pesach, there is also a negative prohibition to eat Hametz. This is a separate prohibition to the 7 days of eating Hametz. It's the prohibition related to the Korban Pesach. Since from Hatzot, from midday, the Korban Pesach in temple times would be sacrificed, the Torah prohibited there to be Hametz together with the Korban Pesach, and although we no longer have the Korban Pesach, this prohibition still applies biblically. The only difference between the prohibition after midday till Pesach to the prohibition of Pesach itself is that a person who eats Hametz on Pesach itself has the consequence of karet, whereas we're eating Hametz after midday on the eve of Pesach, that is a negative prohibition which doesn't carry the consequence of karet. The Hachamim added on, and they said because sometimes when you didn't have clocks in those days, you can be confused what exactly the time of midday is. It's a cloudy day, you don't know what time midday is precisely. So they said already 2 hours from before Hatzot, we refrain from eating Hametz. And that's why approximately 11 o'clock a.m. each year, it depends on the exact day, but it's around 11 o'clock each year, we stop eating Hametz, and that's rabbinically mandated. From midday is biblically mandated, and doesn't carry the consequence of karet. From the night, when Pesach begins, that's karet, a person who eats Hametz. Now, of course, Hametz can only be something from the 5 grains. The 5 grains, which are, of course, wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and what's commonly known as oats. Those 5 are the 5 grains, and anything not made from these 5 grains cannot be considered Hametz. So even if people have different minhagim, different customs, or they don't eat on Pesach, rice, potatoes, whatever it may be, it's absolutely incorrect to refer to that as Hametz. It's not Hametz. Hametz is only the 5 grains, which has gone through the process of fermentation. Otherwise, it's not Hametz. Now, if fermentation begins but doesn't finish, this is what we call Hametz Nuksheh. And it's important we understand these definitions for later on. Hametz Nuksheh is forbidden only rabbinically. And this is something which began to ferment, but it didn't finish, and it's only possible to be eaten you wouldn't normally eat something like this. Only if you were very hungry, nothing else to eat, you would eat it. And this isn't considered real Hametz, but it's forbidden on a rabbinic level. So, for example, the example given is the glue used by scribes to write, which they would prepare from flour and water to glue the paper together, etc. That would be Hametz Nuksheh. And although it's edible under pressing circumstances, it's not considered real Hametz. But the important thing is that we can't eat it and we can't own it. So we're going to talk separately later this week about owning Hametz. And it's important to recognize this would be forbidden on a rabbinic level. This is Hametz Nuksheh, where fermentation hasn't concluded, and it is not fitting, and it's difficult for a human to eat. Now, One final point is that we find something unique with hametz, and that is, generally speaking, when food is no longer edible for a human to consume, we consider that no longer prohibited from the Torah, at least, to eat. Hametz is not like that. Hametz, even if it was once fermented and it was food, and then it became spoiled to the extent that a human can't eat it, it's still considered hametz, and it's prohibited to eat. From the Torah, it's still considered hametz. And the reason this is the case is because although this person no longer wants to eat it, but it can still be used as a leavening agent, and therefore still falls under the prohibition of hametz. Only when something has been spoiled so much that even for a dog, this is the definition, unique definition with Pesach, that it's not befitting for a dog, then it loses its whole status of hametz and it's permissible to own, and so on and so forth, because then it's completely spoiled. But that's an important distinction, which we find with Pesach to other things, whereas with other things, normally if something is no longer edible, it's fine. Hasn't got the status of that thing anymore. But when it comes to Pesach, even if it's not edible for a human, as long as it's still edible for an animal, that's still considered hametz because it can be used as a leavening agent. We'll resume with this tomorrow, Be'ezrat Hashem.